Welcome to Inside Finance History, where the past explains money and money explains power. For almost 2,500 years, the art of war has been read by generals, CEOs, investors, entrepreneurs, coaches, politicians, and almost anyone who wants to sound strategic. It has been quoted in boardrooms, used in leadership seminars, dropped into strategy decks, and treated almost like a sacred text. But here is the strange part. Most people who quote Sun Tzu stop too early. They think he was only talking about war. But what if he was talking about something much deeper? What if the art of war was not really about fighting? What if it was about how not to waste limited resources? What if Sun Tzu was actually one of history's earliest thinkers on capital allocation?
A ruler who wins a battle but empties his treasury has not won. He had only changed the shape of his defeat.
That is exactly where this story begins. Because Sun Tzu did not live in a world of clean theories and motivational quotes. He lived in a world of competing kingdoms, endless wars, fragile rulers, massive armies, and states slowly bleeding themselves dry.
Sun Tzu lived during a period when Chinese kingdoms were fighting again and again. But many of these kingdoms were not collapsing because their armies were weak. They were collapsing because their finances were broken. War was not just a military problem, it was an accounting problem. Every campaign needed grain, horses, iron, leather, weapons, carts, workers, administrators, supply lines, and above all, time. Because when tens of thousands of men are sent to war, they are no longer working in the fields. They are not producing food, they are not paying taxes, they are not supporting the economy. So even if a king won the battle, he could still lose the kingdom.
The cost of war is not paid only on the battlefield. It is paid in empty granaries, in abandoned fields, in unpaid officials, in a tired population. A king who sees only the enemy does not see the real danger.
And that real danger was cost. This is the part most people miss. Sun Tzu was not simply advising kings on how to defeat their enemies. He was trying to stop them from destroying themselves while trying to win.
And when you understand that, The Art of War becomes a very different book. Not a book about aggression, but a book about discipline. Not a book about violence, but a book about resource management. Not a book about glory, but a book about survival. Sun Tzu understood something brutally simple. A victory that bankrupts you is not really a victory. A campaign that lasts too long can become more dangerous than the enemy itself. And a ruler who treats resources as unlimited will eventually run out of them.
The greatest victory is not the battle won with heavy losses. The greatest victory is the battle that never becomes necessary.
Now that sounds like military wisdom, but it is also financial wisdom. Because in finance, the same principle applies. A company can grow and still destroy value. A startup can raise money and still burn itself to death. A government can win territory and still lose its fiscal stability. An investor can be right about the idea, but wrong about the timing, and still lose everything.
Sun Tzu's core message was this: before you commit resources, you must understand the cost of commitment. Because once the army moves, once the money is spent, once the campaign begins, the cost starts compounding.
To act without understanding cost is not courage. It is blindness.
And blindness is expensive. One of Sun Tzu's most important ideas is often translated as shaping. In classical Chinese, it is connected to the word xing. It can mean form, shape, disposition, positioning. In a military sense, it means arranging your forces before battle, but in a deeper sense, it means something much bigger. It means shaping the situation before you commit your resources. In simple terms, do not enter a fight and hope you win. Create the conditions where winning becomes likely before the fight even starts.
The weak commander waits for the battle. The wise commander prepares the outcome before the battle begins.
That is not only military strategy. That is smart investing. Think about a great investor. They do not simply throw money into a company and hope for the best. They study the market, They understand the risks. They analyze the people running the business. They examine timing. They look for an edge. The best investors do not just deploy capital. They prepare the ground first.
The final strike is not where victory is created. It is where victory becomes visible.
That is a powerful line. Because in business, in war, in investing, in politics, the visible moment is usually not the real beginning. The real battle starts earlier, in preparation, in information, in positioning, in patience. This is where Sun Tzu becomes incredibly relevant to modern finance, because capital should not be used to discover whether you are right. Capital should be used after you have done enough work to make the decision intelligent.
A company that enters a new market without understanding regulation, distribution, customer behavior, or competitors is not being bold. It is gambling. A startup that burns cash without shaping demand is not being aggressive. It is wasting capital. A government that starts a war without understanding the long-term cost is not being powerful. It is being financially reckless.
To spend before knowing is to feed the fire and call it strategy.
Exactly. Before any major action, Sun Tzu insisted on assessment. And at the beginning of The Art of War, he gives 5 key factors. At first, they sound ancient, but when you translate them into modern language, they sound exactly like a due diligence checklist. First, moral law. In simple terms, internal alignment. Does the population support the decision? Are the people behind the leader? Is there enough unity to survive pressure? Because if the inside is divided, the outside enemy may not need to do much.
An army divided before battle is already wounded.
Second, heaven. This means timing. Is this the right season? Are the conditions favorable? Is the cycle helping you or working against you? In finance, this is market timing. You may have the right idea, but if the timing is wrong, the cost can destroy you.
A good decision made at the wrong time becomes a bad decision.
Third, earth. This means terrain. Where are the advantages? Where are the choke points? Where is movement easy? Where does it become expensive? In business, terrain could mean distribution channels, regulation, customer access, infrastructure, or market structure.
Do not blame courage for what terrain has already decided.
Fourth, the commander. This is leadership quality. Who is making the decisions? Can they execute under pressure? Do they understand the situation clearly? Because even the best strategy can fail in weak hands.
A confused leader makes even strong resources fragile.
And fifth, method and discipline. This is operational efficiency. Can the organization actually do what it says it will do? Can plans become action? Can orders become results?
A plan that cannot be executed is only decoration.
So when we put these 5 factors together, they are not mystical at all. They are practical. Internal alignment, timing, structural advantage, leadership, execution. That is not just ancient military wisdom. That is modern capital allocation. Sun Tzu is basically asking one question. Before you spend your resources, do you actually understand what you are getting into? Because if you do not, you are not doing strategy. You are gambling. Now we come to one of the most important ideas in the art of war: information. Sun Tzu understood that information is not a small support function. It is the main resource.
Armies matter. Weapons matter. Supply lines matter. But if you do not know what is actually happening, all those resources can be sent in the wrong direction. And that is where waste begins.
An army moving with false information is not powerful. It is expensive.
Sun Tzu devotes an entire chapter to intelligence. That is not accidental. He knew that one good piece of information could save a kingdom from disaster. One reliable source could prevent an army from marching for months in the wrong direction. One accurate insight into the enemy's intentions could avoid years of unnecessary conflict. The cost of knowing is almost always lower than the cost of not knowing. That sentence could sit inside any modern investment committee. Governments spend billions on intelligence not because they enjoy collecting information. They do it because operating blind is far more expensive. Investors pay for research because ignorance is costly. Companies study markets because launching into the wrong environment can destroy capital.
To know is cheaper than to repair the damage caused by not knowing.
In financial terms, good intelligence is insurance against catastrophic misallocation. And Sun Tzu understood that 2,500 years ago. He also understood the opposite. The biggest source of waste is not always weakness, it is misallocation. An army sent to the wrong place, a campaign built on false assumptions, resources committed to the wrong objective, a leader who acts before knowing the truth. That is where the real damage happens.
A sharp sword in the wrong hand can cut its owner.
And this is why Sun Tzu cared so much about ground truth. Not rumors, not wishes, not projections, not what the ruler wants to believe. What is actually true? That is the question. And honestly, this may be one of the most important financial lessons in the whole book. Because in any system where large resources are being deployed, accuracy is everything.
Bad information makes good resources dangerous. A powerful army with bad intelligence can destroy itself. A rich company with bad market insight can burn billions. A government with bad assumptions can enter a war it cannot afford.
The enemy outside the gate is dangerous, but the illusion inside the mind is worse.
There is another concept in the art of war that is less famous, but maybe even more important. The Chinese word is shi. It is often translated as strategic advantage, momentum, or potential force. But financially, the idea is easy to understand. Shi is accumulated advantage. It is the power that builds before the visible action happens. Sun Tzu compares it to water held behind a dam. The energy is not created when the water moves. The energy was already there. It was built by position.
When water breaks through the dam, people see the flood. They do not see the long accumulation behind it.
That is basically compounding. Not only compounding in the narrow sense of interest on interest, but compounding as accumulated advantage. A state that builds alliances, secures supplies, trains its forces, studies the enemy, and controls the terrain is not winning only when the battle begins. It has been winning for years. The final battle is just the visible moment. The real victory was built earlier. And this is exactly how durable business advantages work. A company builds a brand, a distribution network, a loyal customer base, a cost advantage, a technology platform, a regulatory position. Then one day it enters a new market. To outsiders it looks sudden, but actually the advantage was built long before. That is shi.
The wise do not depend on force alone. They arrange the world so that force is barely needed.
This is why Sun Tzu feels so modern, because in markets the same rule applies. The strongest companies often do not win because they attack harder. They win because they have been building advantage quietly for years. The brand was built before the campaign. The distribution was built before the launch. The trust was built before the sale. The data was collected before the decision. When the market finally sees the move, most of the work has already been done.
The crowd sees the strike. The strategist sees the years that made the strike unnecessary.
And this is where the ancient story becomes very modern. The kingdoms that understood this logic survived longer. They did not always avoid war. They did not always win forever. No state lasts forever. But the ones that used intelligence, alliances, timing, and quick decisive action had a better chance than those that treated war as a display of pride. Because war is expensive, and long wars are brutally expensive. The states that ignored this wrote their own endings. They won battles but lost their tax base. They captured territory but emptied their granaries. They returned victorious but could no longer pay their own officials. That is not victory. That is insolvency with better branding.
A kingdom that cannot function after victory has only defeated itself in public.
And this pattern did not end in ancient China. We can see it again and again in modern history. The most powerful militaries in the world often win battles. But winning battles is not the same as winning the financial logic of a conflict. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. In each case, the cost lasted far longer than expected. The battlefield was only one part of the story. The deeper damage happened through time, money, political exhaustion, and prolonged exposure.
The enemy does not always defeat you. Sometimes time defeats you. Sometimes cost defeats you. Sometimes your own commitment defeats you.
Sun Tzu would not have been surprised, because he warned about this exact mechanism.
This is also why many modern tools of power are deeply Sun Tzu. Sanctions are Sun Tzu. Deterrence is Sun Tzu. Cyber operations are Sun Tzu. Proxy relationships are Sun Tzu. Covert influence is Sun Tzu. Why? Because all of them try to achieve strategic goals without the full cost of direct confrontation. They shape the situation before open conflict becomes necessary. They are cheaper than war. And Sun Tzu said very clearly that the best victory is the one won without fighting.
The highest form of power is not destruction. It is making destruction unnecessary.
That is not just moral wisdom, it is financial discipline. Because direct conflict is expensive, indirect influence is cheaper. Full war is expensive, positioning is cheaper, reaction is expensive, preparation is cheaper. This is the logic of Sun Tzu, and it is still alive today.
In markets, the same logic applies. The best investors are not always the loudest or most aggressive. Often, they are the most patient. They spend years building an informational edge. They study patterns before others notice them. They position early. They wait. And when the moment finally comes, they do not need to force the outcome. The situation is already tilted in their favor. That is shaping. That is Sun Tzu, running quietly inside modern finance.
Patience is not inaction. It is the accumulation of advantage.
Exactly. The amateur wants action. The professional wants position. The amateur wants excitement. The professional wants asymmetry. The amateur asks, how can I win? The strategist asks, how can I make losing unlikely before I even begin? That is the difference.
The deeper lesson of the art of war is not about being ruthless. It is not about tricks. It is not about fighting harder than everyone else. The deeper lesson is stewardship. Sun Tzu was writing for rulers who controlled the productive capacity of an entire state, its people, its farms, its metals, its trade, its institutions, its future. And his message was simple. You do not truly own these resources. You are responsible for them.
A ruler who spends the people as if they are coins will soon have neither people nor coins.
Every decision must be judged by what it costs and what it preserves, not just by glory, not just by ambition, not just by the emotional desire to win, but by whether the state can still function after the decision is made. The general who preserves the army may be wiser than the general who wins a brilliant battle by destroying it.
The campaign that ends in 3 months is better than the campaign that drags on for 3 years. And the war that never happens may be better than the war that is won, because the war that never happens costs nothing.
The cleanest victory leaves the treasury full, the fields planted, and the people alive.
That may sound cold, but it is actually one of the most disciplined financial ideas ever written. Capital is limited, time is limited, people are limited, energy is limited. And the greatest danger is not always the enemy across the field. Sometimes the greatest danger is the decision maker who behaves as if resources are infinite. That is why Sun Tzu's genius was not simply that he understood war, it was that he understood cost. And in a world where war and money were inseparable, that made him one of the most valuable strategic thinkers in history.
Anyone can spend resources. Few can preserve them. Fewer still can multiply their effect without exhausting them.
So maybe The Art of War is not really a book about how to fight. Maybe it is a book about how not to run out. Not running out of money, not running out of people, not running out of patience, not running out of political stability, not running out of the future.
To survive is not enough. To survive with capacity intact, that is strategy.
History does not repeat exactly, but capital has habits. And one of its oldest habits is this: it flows towards those who understand its logic, and it abandons those who treat it as endless. Sun Tzu understood that 2,500 years ago. He was not just teaching kings how to win battles. He was teaching them how not to bankrupt their future.
The greatest strategist is not the one remembered for destruction. It is the one whose people still have a future after the victory.
And maybe that is the real reason the art of war still matters. Not because we live in a world of ancient battlefields, but because we still live in a world of scarce resources, bad decisions, expensive pride, and leaders who confuse action with strategy. Sun Tzu was not just talking about war. He was talking about money. He was talking about power. He was talking about the hidden cost behind every ambitious decision. Because every empire, every company, every government, and every investor eventually faces the same question. Are you using your resources wisely? Or are you slowly destroying the future you are trying to win? If this gave you a new way to look at history, money, and power, subscribe to Inside Finance History, because history has the answers. You just have to follow the money.